So, good afternoon. How about a little more vigor? Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, that's better. We can. So, how are you doing? Yeah? Yeah, it's a curious time, isn't it? Victor Turner, the anthropologist, talks about the idea of liminality, of in-betweenness. You know, when it's sort of not here and not there, but in between. And those are moments of enormous excitement, but also anxiety. They're exhilarating and they're frightening, and here you are. And actually, it's going to go on for a while until a few years from now, you all dress up in the same way and surround yourselves with family and friends and go out changed to change the world. That's called graduation. I'd like to share a bit about my journey with Harvard. I grew up in Bakersfield, California, where my father was a rabbi, my mother was a teacher, and Bakersfield is an oil and agriculture town at the southern end of the San Joaquin Valley. When I graduated from high school there, one of my main objectives was to get about as far from Bakersfield as I could. It was made infamous by John Steinbeck in Grapes of Wrath, and the book was actually banned in the high school libraries until 1972, which gives you a little idea of Bakersfield. And I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to come here to Harvard. And boy, it was far from Bakersfield. And talk about a combination of excitement and intimidation. I mean, it was, wow. And if you think it's elitist now, you should have seen it then. You know, one way to get a glimpse of it is at graduation they have what we call the Geezer Parade. Any idea what the Geezer Parade is? The Geezer Parade is like the procession of classes, and it goes back to 19-aught whatever. And it starts out with like little old white guys that kind of like this, and then it's gradually, you know, like those human evolution things, it's gradually like, gradually a little more, and then you see the occasional woman, and then there's the occasional spot of color, and then there's a few more spots of color, and then you get to what it is today. Well, it's a different place than it was then, but it was, and you're helping to make it a much more interesting place. It was a place that was, as I say, very challenging for me, very exciting for me, and it was where I, after 3 years here, decided actually to leave it. I volunteered for the Mississippi Summer Project in 1964 and left. I was studying history and literature. Somehow it seemed a little more relevant to try to make history than study it at the time. That's a little bit of undergraduate arrogance, but that's not inappropriate, and went to Mississippi and went to work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and worked there for 2 years. And that was really where I got my political education, truth be told, and learned about race and power and politics in America and learned the difference between charity work and justice work, and really found what was going to be my calling for the next 28 years, which was to develop leadership, build community around leadership, and work with communities to transform their resources into the power they need to make change in their lives or organizing. After 2 years in the South, I went back to Bakersfield where I'd grown up, and it was interesting. Cesar Chavez had just started a grape strike 30 miles from there. And it was interesting. I had grown up in the farm worker world, but in the middle of it, but I'd never seen it. I had to go to Mississippi and get educated about race, power, and politics to go back home with what we call Mississippi Eyes and see another community of people of color, also without political rights, also economically marginalized, and also in a state with its own history of racial segregation going back to the turn of the century with the Chinese. And it turned out Mississippi was not an exception, but rather an example of America, but drawn boldly. So I began working with Cesar and did that for the next 16 years up until 1981. Another 10 years of union issue and electoral work, mostly in California. And then I got invited to my 25th reunion at Harvard. Now that's strange. I'd never graduated. I still had a year to go. I had never been to a reunion. And I said, what are they inviting me? What is this? And I said, well, 25 years out, you'll see. By that time, you probably have made some money, and you may have a kid. So there's a convergence of interests. So that's timely. And there was this guy up in Seattle who had dropped out and had made a fair amount of money. Yeah, he did pretty well. That wasn't true for me. But I for some reason, I came back here, and It was a little bit like running into a 20-year-old version of me that was still here. You know how when you live intensely someplace, you leave a little part of yourself there? And so we had this conversation and said, how's it going? Said my 20-year-old me. And I said, well, I don't know. I've been at this stuff for a long time, and I need to go deeper, and I need to go broader, both. I'm feeling stuck. And so then 20-year-old me said, well, why don't you come back and finish that senior year you never did? I said, oh, that's silly. Well, think about it. So the last day I went to see one of the deans. And this was, and I was so fragile, if he'd laughed at me, that would have been the end of it. But it was a guy named David Illingsworth, turned out to be, he was an Episcopal priest. We talked for 3 hours. We talked about the fact tuition had changed a little bit in the intervening period of time. And figured out a way to do it. So in 1991, I came back, finished my senior year in history and government, wrote a senior thesis on declining political participation over the last 30 years, for which I'd done the field work already, and graduated class of 64-92. And my 81-year-old mother got to come and see her son finally become a college graduate. And now he could make something of himself. It was quite an experience. I mean, I was in junior seminars in political theory. Michael Sandel, 18 juniors, and me. It was fun. And I have to say the faculty were extraordinarily welcoming for this odd returning student after it was more like a gap century than a gap year. But I got the bug, and so I then went to the Kennedy School, did the mid-career program there. I think I may be the only person that went from senior to mid-career in one summer. And then decided to do a PhD in sociology and began that. And was asked, while I was doing my PhD here in sociology, was asked to design a course on organizing at the Kennedy School. And that turned out to be a real gift because it was a way for me to integrate my life experience with social science in a conversation with a rising generation. And I came to think of teaching as an opportunity to have a conversation with the future, which is exactly what it is for those of us who teach. And this is an extraordinary place to have an opportunity to do that. When I finished PhD, I was appointed to the faculty, and so I've been teaching there since then. I teach a course on called Organizing, People, Power, and Change, a course on public narrative, a course on moral leadership, and a distance learning version of my organizing class, which is extraordinary. We have 80 students in 20 different countries right now that are participating. So that's sort of how I got here. And I guess I'll just say a few things about this and then we'll have some discussion. First, I think it's very important to consider where you are going to most be able to explore your own calling. Now, I'm not talking about career, I'm talking about calling. I'm talking about what it is that moves you, what it is you really want to figure out, find out, what the impact is you want to have on the world. Consider where you can pursue that. I mean, Cesar Chavez used to say, he says, it's not so much making the right decision as it is making the decision you make the right decision. Now, that's an important distinction because we can get so freaked out about that. But consider where you're going to have the best opportunity to make the decision you make the right decision. Where can you explore? Where can you try things? Where can you, life is anything but linear, as perhaps I'm sort of an example of. And this whole idea that you have it planned out for 30 years and then it's all going to fall into place, well, that's just nonsense. And the real question is, what do you do next? And in terms of what do you do next, consider what your heart tells you. I mean, emotions tell us what's important to us. They're not to be ignored. In fact, they're to be appreciated and focused on and paid attention to. So consider where your heart tells you, yes, this is the place where I can do what I want to do, become what I want to become. It could be here, it could be elsewhere. But that's, in my experience, the most important thing. Consider who you want to learn among. Consider not just faculty, but your fellow students. My fall class on public narrative, we have 140 students. They're from 31 different countries. 31 different countries. It's having a conversation not just with the future, but with the world in every classroom. It is an extraordinary learning opportunity for someone teaching to have that kind of encounter with the world as it changes around us. And that's what happens here. That's what you have access to here and the opportunity to experience here. And finally, I just want to say, consider where you can engage in real challenge of the institution. See, it's important to how can I put this? It's important to respect your own experience. Respect the experience you bring to wherever you go. Not to get stuck in it, but to appreciate it and to stand upon it in engaging with the challenges that come your way. But that means the challenge runs two ways. And see, any institution like this one that's been around for any time needs constant challenge. Otherwise, it doesn't change, it doesn't grow, it doesn't adapt. And the way an institution like this can change is through the students that bring the real world to it, with their questions, with their challenges, with their experiences. And I don't want to recommend this, but I know the first place I ever picketed in the world was Harvard. We had discovered that Harvard owned stock in Mississippi Power and Light Company way back in the 60s, and we went down to Atlanta, met with the SNCC staff, came back, and the first thing we did was picket President Pusey of Harvard. And so that was my sort of debut on what was going to be a 28-year career. So Harvard has sort of this other side to it as a place that, if it doesn't welcome challenge, can handle it, and you can grow from doing it. That's important to consider as well, I think. So we can go into questions now and so forth, but again, just consider this is a place where the future is conceived. It's where it's shaped. And you're going to be shaping that future. Consider where and with whom and for what purpose. Thank you.